Grant Whitmore believed he had orchestrated the perfect divorce. He would keep the sprawling estate, the offshore accounts, and the business empire worth tens of millions of dollars. His wife would walk away with almost nothing. In his mind, he was already hearing the champagne cork pop. Then the heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open and a ghost from the past stepped inside. The air in the Cook County Circuit Court was suffocating, thick with the smell of lemon polish, aging paper, and the silent tension of lives being torn apart. Rain hammered against the tall, arched windows, casting long, mournful shadows across the polished mahogany benches. Grant noticed none of it. To him, this was the brightest day of his life. He sat comfortably at the plaintiff's table, adjusting the cuffs of his custom-made Brioni suit. A gold Rolex flashed beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Impeccably groomed, with silver beginning to touch his temples, Grant carried himself like a man who had conquered the logistics industry and was now preparing to conquer his marriage. He radiated the calm confidence of a predator standing over prey that could no longer fight back. Across the aisle sat his soon-to-be ex-wife, Evelyn. Evelyn Mercer Whitmore looked like a faded photograph of the woman Grant had married. She wore a simple navy dress that hung loosely from her slender frame. Her hands were tightly folded in her lap, her knuckles pale, while her eyes remained fixed on the scratched wooden floor. She appeared completely defeated. Beside her sat Tessa Caldwell, a former public defender who had moved into family law. She looked nearly as exhausted as her client. Her table was buried beneath disorganized manila folders, handwritten notes, and a half-finished cup of cold coffee. "Your Honor," Preston Vale declared. Grant's attorney was a broad-shouldered bulldog of a man dressed in a sharkskin suit. He was famous for merciless cross-examinations and an almost complete absence of compassion. "The financial disclosures are clear, comprehensive, and uncontested. My client, Mr. Whitmore, built Whitmore Logistics from the ground up through his determination, intelligence, and business instincts." Vale paced confidently before the judge's bench. The prenuptial agreement, which Ms. Mercer signed willingly before the marriage, clearly separates Mr. Whitmore's business interests from the marital estate. He stopped and turned toward Evelyn's table. "Furthermore, the defense has failed to produce a single piece of evidence proving that Ms. Mercer contributed financially or strategically to the growth of the company." Vale spread his hands as though the conclusion were obvious. "Therefore, the proposed settlement, a lump sum of $50,000, ownership of her personal vehicle, and limited spousal support capped at $5,000 is not only legally appropriate but extraordinarily generous under the circumstances." A faint smirk touched Grant's lips. Generous. The offer was an insult, and he loved every second of it. Whitmore Logistics had recently been valued at $85 million. However, Grant had spent years quietly draining its liquid assets into a maze of offshore trusts and shell corporations. The crown jewel of his scheme was a Cayman Islands holding company he had named Blue Horizon. On paper, Grant Whitmore appeared heavily indebted, short on cash, and barely capable of keeping his company alive in a struggling economy. In reality, he was prepared to live like an emperor the moment the divorce decree was signed. Judge Alistair Munro, a stern, white-haired jurist whose face suggested he had witnessed every ugly corner of human nature, peered over his reading glasses at Evelyn. "Ms. Caldwell," he said in a rough, gravelly voice, "I have reviewed your filings concerning the alleged hidden assets. However, allegations are not evidence." He folded his hands before him. "You have presented no documented connection between Mr. Whitmore and these offshore accounts, nor have you successfully challenged the validity of the prenuptial agreement." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Does the defense have anything substantive to present before I issue my ruling on the division of assets?" Grant leaned toward Vale and whispered behind one carefully manicured hand. "We have her. She has nothing." Vale gave him a brief nod. "It's finished, Grant. Try to look disappointed when the judge rules." Grant looked across the aisle at Evelyn. For the smallest moment, he almost felt sorry for her. Then the feeling disappeared beneath a wave of intoxicating triumph. Grant had spent years isolating Evelyn and convincing her that she was incapable of surviving without him. He controlled every dollar that entered their home. He cut her off from her friends, intercepted her correspondence, and slowly dismantled her confidence until she no longer trusted her own judgment. But his greatest manipulation involved her family. Evelyn had grown up in a fractured household. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father, Gideon Mercer, had earned a reputation as a difficult and eccentric expatriate who had supposedly lost his fortune through failed ventures in Europe. At one point, Grant intercepted a letter from Gideon asking to reconnect with his daughter. Grant burned it. Later, he told Evelyn that he had spoken with her father's former associates in London and learned that the old man had died penniless in a public hospital. Evelyn mourned him. In her grief, she became completely dependent on Grant. It was the perfect psychological prison. "Your Honor," Tessa Caldwell said as she slowly rose from her chair. Her voice trembled slightly. "The defense acknowledges the strict language of the prenuptial agreement. However," she paused and glanced at her notes, appearing to lose her courage. Vale released a loud theatrical sigh. "Your Honor, please. These proceedings have already continued far too long. My client's businesses are suffering because of the stress and disruption. Ms. Caldwell is clearly attempting to delay the inevitable. I will allow Ms. Caldwell to finish her sentence, Mr. Vale, Judge Monroe snapped. The aggressive attorney immediately fell silent. Proceed, counselor. Thank you, Your Honor. Caldwell drew in a slow breath and straightened her shoulders. The nervousness vanished from her posture. In its place came a strange, icy calm. We are not challenging the terms of the prenuptial agreement, she said. We are challenging the foundation upon which Mr. Whitmore's entire financial empire was built. A murmur moved through the courtroom. Caldwell turned toward Grant. We assert that Whitmore Logistics does not belong to him. Grant frowned and looked at Vale. His attorney appeared annoyed but not alarmed. That is an extraordinary claim, counselor, Judge Monroe said, leaning back in his leather chair. One that will require extraordinary proof. High glanced at the documents before him. According to the incorporation records, Mr. Whitmore provided the initial $2 million investment through a private loan. Yes, Your Honor, Caldwell replied, stepping out from behind her table. A private loan issued by a blind trust. Mr. Whitmore testified under oath that the trust was managed by an independent holding group that was later dissolved. And, the judge asked? Caldwell turned slowly toward Grant. For the first time during the hearing, Evelyn lifted her head. She was not crying. Her eyes were dry, bright, and fixed directly on her husband with such intensity that an unexplained chill moved through Grant's body. And, Your Honor, Caldwell continued, her voice ringing clearly across the courtroom, we have obtained the original unredacted charter of that blind trust. Grant's smile vanished. We also have a witness who can testify to the true source of the investment, the conditions under which it was released, and the route taken by the funds Mr. Whitmore illegally transferred into the Cayman Islands. Vale shot to his feet. His face turned dark red. Objection, Your Honor. This is an ambush. Discovery has already closed. Ms. Caldwell cannot introduce a surprise witness at the final hearing. He pointed angrily toward the defense table. This is a blatant procedural violation and a desperate attempt to derail a lawful settlement. Your Honor, Caldwell replied calmly. The witness only recently became available. The court may allow newly discovered evidence when it concerns active and continuing fraud against the court. She looked directly at Grant. Mr. Whitmore committed perjury concerning his financial disclosures. He testified that he had no knowledge of the Blue Horizon accounts. Her voice sharpened. This witness can prove that Mr. Whitmore is the sole signatory. More importantly, he can prove that the original investment used to create Whitmore Logistics was conditional upon Mr. Whitmore's marriage to my client. The air left Grant's lungs. Blue Horizon. How did she know that name? High had paid elite financial specialists in Geneva and Georgetown to bury it beneath layers of corporate anonymity. His heart began pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. Judge Monroe stared at Caldwell before turning his hard gaze toward Grant. Suddenly, Grant felt painfully exposed beneath his expensive suit. The judge lifted his gavel and slowly turned it in his hands. Fraud against the court is an extremely serious accusation, Ms. Caldwell, he warned. If you are wasting this court's time, I will impose sanctions so severe that your career may never recover. I understand the risk perfectly, Your Honor, Caldwell replied without hesitation. I strongly object to this circus, Vale shouted. Overruled, Mr. Vale. Sit down. Judge Monroe's voice cracked through the room. I am going to hear the witness. If the testimony proves irrelevant, I will strike it and issue my ruling. He looked at Caldwell. Call your witness. Grant seized Vale's sleeve, his fingers turning white. Stop her, Preston, he whispered urgently. Do something. Vale tore his arm free. Stay calm. It's probably some bitter former accountant looking for money. I'll destroy the witness during cross-examination. He leaned closer. Keep your mouth shut and try to look composed. But Grant could no longer pretend to be calm. The walls of the courtroom seemed to be moving inward. Tessa Caldwell turned toward the rear of the room. The defense calls Gideon Mercer to the stand. The name remained suspended in the silence. Grant froze. The blood drained from his face until his skin looked like old parchment. Gideon Mercer. No, that was impossible. Gideon was dead. High had to be dead. Grant had lied to Evelyn about her father's death. But he had genuinely believed that the old man had eventually died somewhere in Britain, forgotten and penniless. High looked at Evelyn. She was watching him. The faint smile touching her lips was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. A brass handle clicked at the rear of the courtroom. Every person in the gallery turned. Slowly, the enormous oak doors opened. Standing in the doorway was a man who appeared to have stepped from another century, carrying the storm inside with him. Gideon Mercer was well into his later years, yet he stood with the rigid posture of a military commander. He wore a flawless charcoal gray three-piece suit that seemed to radiate wealth. In one hand, he held a polished blackthorn walking stick capped with heavy silver. His thick white hair was swept back from a face carved with hard, uncompromising lines. But it was his eyes that silenced the room. They were a pale, piercing blue, sharp as broken glass and fixed directly upon Grant Whitmore. The steady strike of Gideon's cane against the wooden floor echoed through the courtroom like a funeral bell as he walked down the center aisle. Grant could not breathe. His hands began trembling uncontrollably. High tried to speak to Vale, but his throat had gone completely dry. This was not the ruined, eccentric Grant had imagined. This man carried an aura of immense, quiet, and frightening power. Vale looked at Grant and finally noticed the complete collapse of his client's confidence. "Who the hell is that?" he whispered. "Her father," Grant managed to rasp. Vale's eyes widened. "You told me her father was a dead, penniless drunk." "How was supposed to be?" Grant hissed. Gideon reached the wooden barrier separating the gallery from the center of the courtroom. He paused and surveyed the room before his gaze settled on Evelyn. For the briefest moment, his hard expression softened. A silent understanding passed between father and daughter. Then the granite mask returned. He approached the witness stand. The bailiff stepped forward and held out a worn Bible. "Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do." Gideon's voice was a deep, resonant baritone. His refined transatlantic accent commanded absolute silence. He sat in the witness box, rested the silver-tipped cane between his knees, and fixed his pale blue eyes upon Grant. "Please state your name for the record," Caldwell said. "Gideon William Mercer." "Mr. Mercer,
Mercer will be my.
I am the senior managing partner and principal shareholder of Mercer & Croft, a private equity and wealth management firm based in London and Zurich. Vale nearly dropped his pen. Mercer & Croft was not simply a financial firm. It was an institution responsible for managing billions of dollars belonging to European aristocratic families and international investors. Cold sweat formed across Grant's forehead. I was a millionaire. Gideon Mercer was a financial leviathan. "Mr. Mercer," Caldwell continued, "are you familiar with the plaintiff in this case, Grant Whitmore?" Gideon never looked away from Grant. "Intimately, unfortunately. Please explain the nature of your relationship with Mr. Whitmore." "When my daughter informed me that she intended to marry a mid-level manager employed by a shipping company, I had serious reservations," Gideon began. "My daughter is my only heir, and I am a man of considerable means. I wish to protect her. I also wish to test the character of the man she had chosen." Judge Munro leaned forward, completely absorbed. "Continue, Mr. Mercer." "Through a proxy firm in New York, I arranged for Mr. Whitmore to receive a $2 million unsecured business loan to establish his logistics company." Gideon folded his hands over the handle of his cane. The loan contained a highly specific and confidential covenant within the charter of the Blind Trust. He turned slightly toward the judge. "The funds, along with all equity generated from them, were provided on the condition that Mr. Whitmore remained legally married to my daughter." The courtroom became completely still. If he filed for divorce, or if he engaged in financial misconduct against her, the principal loan, adjusted for corporate growth and compound interest, would immediately revert to the trust. A cold, merciless smile touched the corners of Gideon's mouth. "In plain language, Your Honor, I own Whitmore Logistics." He allowed the words to settle. "Every truck, every warehouse, every piece of property, every dollar." His eyes returned to Grant. "Grant Whitmore has never truly been the owner of that company. He has merely served as my uninformed, temporary employee." The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Judge Munro struck his gavel. "Order, order in the court." The room began spinning around Grant, his $85 million empire. His offshore accounts and all the years of arrogant superiority had been nothing more than a house of cards built upon a foundation owned by the man he had tried to erase from Evelyn's life. "Objection!" Vale shouted. His voice cracked as he rose, realizing that his own reputation might be dragged beneath the wreckage. "This is hearsay. It is a fantasy. Where is the proof of this alleged arrangement?" Tessa Caldwell calmly lifted a thick, leather-bound folder from her table. "Your Honor, the defense submits Exhibit D into evidence." She handed the documents to the bailiff. "This is the original, unredacted charter of the Proxy Trust. It bears Mr. Whitmore's signature and contains the conditional covenant Mr. Mercer has described." The bailiff delivered copies to the judge in Vale. Vale snatched the document and scanned the pages frantically. Grant leaned toward him, his vision blurring. Even through the haze, he could see his own signature at the bottom of the final page, directly beneath a dense section of legal language he had never bothered to read carefully. "There is more, Your Honor," Caldwell said. Her voice carried the weight of a final blow. "Mr. Mercer's firm also specializes in forensic accounting. His investigators traced the precise routing information Mr. Whitmore used to transfer the company's liquid assets into the Cayman Islands." She turned toward Grant, reflecting the same cold triumph he had felt only moments earlier. "We have the wire transfers, the IP addresses, and the signature records connected to Blue Horizon." Her eyes narrowed. "Mr. Whitmore did not merely attempt to defraud my client, By concealing these funds, he attempted to embezzle from Mr. Mercer. Gideon leaned forward in the witness box. His pale blue eyes held Grant in place like an insect pinned beneath glass. "You see, Grant," he said in a terrifyingly quiet voice, "you believed you had broken my daughter's wings." He paused. "But you forgot who gave them to her." Grant's chest tightened. Cold sweat soaked through the shirt beneath his expensive suit. The courtroom fell into absolute silence, disturbed only by the heavy rhythm of rain against the windows. Vale stepped forward, desperate to save his professional reputation, his enormous legal fees, and whatever financial reward he had expected from Grant's offshore fortune. His face became a mask of manufactured confidence. "Mr. Mercer, this has certainly been an impressive performance," he said. "But courts deal in verifiable facts, not dramatic stories." He raised the trust document. "Even if this document is genuine, which we strongly dispute, you expect this court to believe that you handed $2 million to a man you did not trust without any supervision?" Gideon did not move. He looked at Vale with the detached curiosity of a man observing an irritating insect. "I did not hand it to him, Mr. Vale," Gideon replied. "I tethered him with it." Vale's jaw tightened. It is standard practice in high-risk investment arrangements to include catastrophic safeguards. Grant possessed ruthless ambition, but he had no pedigree, no loyalty, and no moral compass. Gideon's fingers tightened around the silver head of his cane. "I gave him the rope. I simply waited to discover whether he would use it to build a bridge or hang himself." Vale gripped the edges of the podium. "And what of the Cayman accounts? Are you openly admitting that your firm illegally accessed and monitored my client's private international banking records?" "There is nothing private about stolen money," Gideon answered. His voice remained smooth and deadly calm. "Mercer and Croft manages sovereign wealth funds and aristocratic estates across several continents. Our forensic accounting department cooperates directly with international law enforcement and financial crimes agencies." He looked toward Grant. "When your client attempted to transfer $34 million from Whitmore Logistics into Blue Horizon, our security systems immediately detected a violation of the trust covenant." Gideon leaned forward slightly. "In fact, Grant, you attempted to access the offshore account before entering this courtroom, did you not?" Grant's stomach turned. He had checked the account on his encrypted phone while sitting in the courthouse lobby. The application had displayed nothing but a sterile connection error. "You assumed the banking server was temporarily unavailable," Gideon continued. A predatory smile spread across his weathered face. "The server was functioning perfectly." His voice hardened. "My attorneys filed an injunction in Georgetown. Every asset connected to Blue Horizon has been frozen and seized by international authorities, pending an embezzlement investigation." A wave of shock moved through the courtroom. "You do not possess $85 million, Grant." Gideon spoke each word slowly. "Your credit cards have been declined. Your personal accounts are locked. You no longer have enough accessible money to purchase a cup of coffee after leaving this building." A collective gasp rose from the gallery. Tessa Caldwell sat motionless, radiating quiet satisfaction. Evelyn released a long, trembling breath. The invisible chains created by years of emotional cruelty seemed to shatter around her. Vale stepped backward from the podium. His aggressive posture completely collapsed. He looked at Grant with a mixture of horror and professional self-preservation. I was standing beside a man connected to a massive financial crime, and he knew it. "Your Honor," Vale stammered, his powerful voice reduced to a weak squeak. "I believe I must request a recess so I may consult privately with my client." "There will be no recess and there will be no private consultation," Judge Monroe thundered. His voice struck the courtroom like a physical blow. His face was flushed with righteous anger. He leaned over the mahogany bench and slammed one hand against the wood. "I have presided over thousands of bitter and dishonest divorce cases. Rarely have I witnessed such an arrogant, deliberate, and carefully calculated act of perjury and fraud committed in my courtroom." He lifted the unredacted trust charter and waved it like a weapon. "Mr. Whitmore, you sat before this court, placed your hand upon a Bible, and swore under penalty of perjury that your financial disclosures were complete and truthful." The judge's eyes burned with fury. "You presented yourself as financially desperate. You attempted to leave a woman who devoted years of her life to you with almost nothing." His voice rose. "At the same time, you were attempting to steal tens of millions of dollars from her and her family." The courtroom remained frozen. "You attempted to use the authority of this court to complete a massive financial crime." Grant struggled to his feet. His knees shook so violently that he had to grip the edge of the table. "Your Honor, please. If you would allow me to explain, this is all a misunderstanding." "Sit down and close your mouth," Judge Monroe roared. The bailiff immediately stepped forward, one hand moved toward his utility belt. Grant swallowed and collapsed back into his chair. The confident, untouchable businessman who had entered the courtroom had disappeared. In his place sat a broken, trembling man struggling to breathe. "Here is my ruling," Judge Monroe said. He returned to his seat and took up his pen. His voice was cold and uncompromising. "The plaintiff's proposed settlement is rejected in its entirety." He began writing on the official docket. Based upon the uncontested evidence contained in the original trust covenant, Whitmore Logistics, including all subsidiaries, physical property, financial assets, and intellectual property, is recognized as the sole legal property of the Mercer Trust. The judge looked toward Evelyn. Evelyn Mercer is the trust's principal and sole beneficiary. He turned his attention back to Grant. Mr. Whitmore, you are immediately stripped of every executive title, salary, and form of access to the company. Evelyn closed her eyes. A single tear moved slowly down her cheek. It was not a tear of grief. It was the release of years spent suffocating beneath crushing emotional pressure. Tessa reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am granting the divorce with extreme prejudice. His pen moved rapidly across the page. Ms. Mercer will retain the primary marital residence, the vehicles, and all domestic financial accounts. He stared at Grant. Mr. Whitmore, I am holding you in contempt of court for egregious perjury. He turned toward the bailiff. You will take Mr. Whitmore into custody immediately upon adjournment. A strangled sound escaped Grant's throat. He covered his face with both hands. And lastly, Judge Monroe said with cold finality, I am forwarding the transcript of this hearing, along with Exhibit D, to the Cook County State's Attorney and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. His gaze remained fixed upon Grant. They will determine the appropriate charges concerning wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and federal perjury. The heavy wooden gavel struck the bench with a definitive crack. Court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted into chaotic movement and overlapping voices. To Grant, every sound became distant and distorted. A deafening white noise filled his ears. He stared blankly at the scratched floorboards, unable to comprehend how completely his life had vanished. How was not merely penniless. How was facing federal prison. A shadow fell across the table. Grant slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red and wide with terror. Evelyn stood directly before him. She no longer resembled the faded, submissive woman he had intended to discard like something worthless. She stood tall, her shoulders drawn back with a powerful and beautiful strength radiating from her. Gideon stood several steps behind her, leaning upon his blackthorn cane like a silent guardian who had finally arrived to deliver justice. Grant opened his mouth. His lips trembled, but no words emerged. What could he possibly say? That he was sorry? The thought was almost insulting. You told me I was nothing without you, Grant, Evelyn said. Her voice was steady, without a trace of the hesitation that had controlled her for so long. You told me my father was a drunken failure. You told me he had died with nothing, abandoned and forgotten. She looked briefly toward Gideon. Father and daughter exchanged a profound expression of love, reunion, and vindication. Then Evelyn turned her clear, cold eyes back toward Grant. You told me I would end up exactly like him if I ever found the courage to leave you. She leaned closer, allowing her words to reach him beneath the noise of the courtroom. You spent our entire marriage trying to convince me that I was weak, foolish, and helpless. Her expression did not change. But all you truly accomplished was teaching me how to survive a monster. She straightened. Enjoy the ride to jail. Evelyn turned away. The fabric of her simple navy dress moved gracefully around her as she approached her father and linked her arm firmly through his. Together, Evelyn Mercer and Gideon Mercer walked down the center aisle with their heads held high. The brass-handled doors opened, allowing them to step into the stormy Chicago afternoon. Behind them, Grant Whitmore remained seated in handcuffs, completely alone among the ruins created by his own greed. Did this courtroom revelation leave you breathless? Greed always carries a terrible price, and Grant Whitmore paid his in full. If you enjoyed watching Evelyn and her brilliant billionaire father deliver justice to the narcissistic man who tried to destroy her, press the like button. Share this story with anyone who loves a powerful tale of revenge and redemption, and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable real-life drama stories.